We're saying yes to Michigan. A&P pledges guaranteed value.
For over 50 years, A&P has been the people's choice.
Our A&P fryer buyer has come up with a great buy on...
Before barcodes, buzzers, and self-checkout, stores had soul. In the 1970s, every store felt like its own little world. Brown tile floors, handwritten signs, cigarette smoke in the air, and that smell you can still remember but can't explain. See them again, and you'll feel the childhood come back. Woolworth's in the 1970s wasn't just a store, it was a slice of Main Street life. You'd walk in for school supplies and get hit with the scent of grilled cheese and bacon from the lunch counter in the back. Red vinyl stools lined a counter where you could grab a burger, sip a cherry Coke, and split a banana split. The soda fountains weren't just gimmicks, they were the heart of the store. You'd hear silverware clinking, lights buzzing, and orders shouted from the kitchen. You didn't just shop there, you lingered. Parents browsed while kids spun on stools or stared at the milkshake machine. Even if you weren't hungry, you sat down, because skipping the lunch counter felt like skipping the point. It was comfort food before that was a trend. And the best part? Prices that made pocket change feel powerful. It was slower, friendlier shopping. But once you finished your grilled cheese, the next stop was waiting, where power tools met warm caramel popcorn. Walking into Sears in the 1970s was like stepping into a carnival. Before you hit the tools section, you were greeted by the smell of popcorn, peanuts, and caramel. Near the doorway was a stand selling wax paper bags of snacks and chunks of cashew brittle. The perfect shopping companion, made better by eating it as you walked. While your dad hunted for Craftsman tools, you were busy trying not to drop caramel on your pants. Kids crowded the stand like it gave out free toys. The candy counter was chaotic and smelled like happiness. You could scoop ribbon candy or sugar sticks from big acrylic bins. Shop for a lawnmower, grab a snack, maybe try on shoes, all under one roof. That popcorn was loud, crunchy, and the soundtrack of errands. But just when you thought Sears had it all, Montgomery Ward dialed things up with a showroom straight out of tomorrow. Montgomery Ward in the 1970s was less store, more suburban spaceship. You walked in and boom, refrigerators, microwaves, and shag-carpeted conversation pits right up front. Their appliance section was center stage, glowing with chrome and laminate. Salesmen in ties spoke about energy efficiency, like preachers of progress. Whole living rooms were built inside the store, complete with paneling, avocado TVs, and stereos the size of a sofa. You didn't just shop, you toured. Kids pushed buttons, teens reclined, dads took notes. Appliances weren't just sold, they were displayed like museum pieces. People visited just to daydream about their future kitchen while pocketing a peppermint. It felt like the Jetsons moved in. And if you needed a part, it was probably next to the furniture. But if gadgets and gear were your thing, only one place delivered a floor-to-ceiling wonderland of wires and switches. Radio Shack in the 1970s was the ultimate hideout for gadget lovers. You'd walk in and be hit with that plastic meets circuit board smell. The floors creaked. The walls, covered in wood paneling and stacked with speaker kits, batteries, and CB radios. It felt like your grandpa's basement exploded into a store. Every shelf had wires, switches, drawers full of diodes, and mystery tech you didn't dare pronounce. Kids checked out walkie-talkies. Dads vanished into the shortwave radio section for just a minute that lasted forever. The staff, half clerk, half mad scientist, eager to explain why you needed a breadboard and how not to burn your fingers. There were demo tables tangled with cords and blinking lights. The catalog? Nerd heaven. Not flashy but dense, every aisle dared you to build something. Even if you had no clue what a resistor was, you probably still bought one. And before you left, there was always that blinking red LED by the counter, daring you to bring it home. But for all of Radio Shack's buzzing chaos, JCPenney had its own multitasking flair. JCPenney in the 1970s was a wild mashup of style and service. You'd go in for curtains and leave with a perm, bell-bottoms, and a catalog thicker than a textbook. Their in-store salons were squeezed between racks and cashiers, so you could try on a blazer, get a trim, and still be home for lunch. The air smelled like polyester, Aquanet, and sample perfume. Stylists talked over humming dryers while shoppers flipped catalogs at long counter desks. That catalog wasn't just for shopping. It was a family ritual. Everyone circled socks and toasters with different colored pens. It was part phone book, part wish list. And if you needed help, someone handwrote the item code like sacred text. You didn't just browse, you strategized. Hair dryers, fashion, catalog orders. It was a salon, store, and mailroom all in one. And if that sounds wild, wait till you remember grocery shopping under dim lights on creaky wood floors. A&P. Grocery stores in the 1970s felt more like quiet temples than snack stops. The lights? Diamond soys. The floors? Scuffed wood and linoleum that creaked with every cart. Walking in felt like entering a club for whispering coupon clippers. The produce glowed under yellow bulbs, making apples look golden and oranges like tiny suns. You didn't rush, you wandered. End caps were full of store-brand peas and cereal boxes with judgmental mascots. It felt like a food library. The scent of fresh bread drifted near the back. If lucky, you'd score a cookie if you whispered, "Thank you." Cashiers used hand-cranked registers, and receipts looked like typewriter relics. It was slower and softer. But if A&P was a calm whisper, Kmart was a flashing blue light with a bullhorn. The blue light special at Kmart wasn't just a promotion, it was an event. You'd be strolling past the patio furniture, minding your business, when suddenly, there it was. A flashing blue siren on a wheeled cart, followed by a loudspeaker blast. "Attention Kmart shoppers! For the next 10 minutes, women's terry cloth bathrobes, aisle 5, half off!" And just like that, people came running. Didn't matter if you needed a bathrobe. That blue light had a magnetic pull. Moms pushed carts like chariots, kids grabbed anything, and staff looked like they were hosting a game show. The light buzzed like it was short-circuiting from excitement. It felt like a flash sale disguised as a fire drill. People loitered near it, pretending to browse just in case. The intercom had its own charm, tinny and echoing like someone was calling deals from a submarine. Shopping turned into a strange kind of hunt. When the light shut off, game over, no do-overs, until the next round. But for something more hands-on and far more glittery, the real magic was just down the road at Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin stores in the 1970s were creative chaos in fluorescent light and linoleum. Half craft shop, half toy store, part Candyland, you could find yarn, glue, and jawbreakers all in the same 5-foot stretch. You'd walk in and instantly smell wax paper, plastic, and Elmer's glue. Aisles were narrow and packed with glitter tubes, googly eyes, and popsicle sticks bundled like fancy lumber. Kids zoomed to the back for erasers. Adults browsed embroidery hoops and paint kits. Grandpa was up front debating towels. The checkout was a sugar trap. Jawbreakers, wax lips, candy dots, and gum cigars that dyed your mouth for days. You didn't just shop there, you scavenged. You came in for one thing and left with 5. It was messy, a little dusty, and full of heart. And when it came to grocery stores with a bold love for color, none leaned harder into the 70s palette than Safeway. Safeway, in the 1970s, was a temple to earth tones. The logo? Deep orange? The signage? Creamsicle swirls. Even the carts were burnt tangerine, like they belonged in a shag-carpeted van. Safeway felt like a vintage filter. Everything had a warm glow that made even frozen peas feel cozy. Floors were loud, ceilings were low. The produce section always had one painted banana or smiling tomato sign hanging above. Bread smelled freshly baked. Red lighting made every steak glow like it came from a sci-fi set. Clerks wore wide collars and game show-style name tags. Groceries went into paper sacks that barely lasted the ride home. But those squeaky orange carts? Unforgettable. No power steering, just elbow grease, and if you had a sibling, they were the passenger. Safeway made shopping feel like an event. But for plush carpet and polite service, Tom McCann had you covered. Tom McCann in the 1970s was less of a shoe store and more of a fitting room on steroids. You didn't just try on shoes, you got seated, in a padded chair, by a man in a tie who measured your foot with a shiny metal contraption that looked like a tiny guillotine. It was formal, it was respectful, it was intense. The carpeting was deep enough to lose a penny in, and the walls were lined with glossy wooden displays featuring rows of loafers, Oxfords, and practical pumps in every shade of brown imaginable. The air smelled like leather, suede, and whatever polish they used to shine up the sample pairs. You'd sit politely while the salesman disappeared to the back, returning with a towering stack of orange boxes like some kind of shoe magician. You tried them on one at a time, walking awkwardly across the carpet while your mom and the salesman nodded approvingly. There were mirrors on the floor and tiny shoehorns on chains. It felt important, like choosing a suit of armor for your feet. But just beyond those plush floors and polished counters was a very different kind of store. A pharmacy where your toothpaste lived right next to a wall of mystery film envelopes. At Osco Drug in the 1970s, the wall of film drop-off envelopes was like a time capsule in progress. You'd come in to grab toothpaste or cough syrup and be greeted by rows and rows of tiny paper envelopes, each one holding someone's memories, waiting to be developed into something magical or embarrassing. They lined the wall like library cards for your personal life. You'd fill out your info, seal the envelope with the film roll inside, and drop it in a metal chute that felt oddly official. The suspense? Intense. A week later, you'd return to flip through a tray of white photo sleeves, praying your vacation shots turned out and that nobody blinked during your cousin's wedding. Every visit to Osco meant passing that wall, each envelope a snapshot of someone's story, someone else's flashbulb moment. Sometimes you'd linger just to read the first names. Linda, Gary, Juanita. It felt nosy and comforting at the same time. And while the pharmacy section smelled like rubbing alcohol and bubblegum vitamins, that film wall smelled like mystery and anticipation. But Osco was a quiet sort of store. If you were craving something louder, flashier, and packed with racks of clothes being frantically sorted through under buzzing fluorescent lights, then your next stop had to be the Friday night phenomenon that was Mervyn's. Mervyn's on a Friday night in the 1970s was less of a department store and more of a full-blown neighborhood event. You weren't just shopping, you were competing. The floors were linoleum, the racks were crammed, and the air was filled with the sound of intercom announcements about markdowns in men's casuals or juniors' denim. The sales were real, the rush was serious, and the line at the dressing rooms? A full contact sport. Families came in after dinner, still in school clothes and windbreakers, ready to hunt down that one clearance jacket or polyester blouse that someone spotted last week but didn't grab in time. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the hangers clacked. The prices were printed on fat paper tags with the clearance price circled in red ink. And if you found something actually in your size, you felt like you'd won the lottery. You went in for socks and left with 4 tops, a belt, and a story to tell. But when the clothes were bought and your cart was full, there was one place your heart and allowance was always saving room for, and the aisles were filled with joy, chaos, and cardboard boxes stacked to the sky. Toys R Us in the 1970s was sensory overload in its purest form. From the second those sliding doors opened, you were hit with a wall of bright colors, blinking displays, and the unmistakable hum of 1,000 electronic toys buzzing, dinging, or talking over each other. The shelves stretched to the sky, or at least it felt like they did when you were 6. Bicycles lined the back like a chrome rainbow. Board games towered in neat stacks, and action figures lived in their own plastic kingdoms. Everything was arranged by brand or theme, but it never really mattered. You zigzagged through the store like a kid on a mission, laser-focused on your birthday list. Jeffrey the Giraffe was everywhere, on signs, on displays, and occasionally as a man in a fuzzy suit sweating under the fluorescent lights. Test toys sat out of the box, already well-worn from eager little hands and half-dead demo batteries. The air smelled like rubber, cardboard, and faint desperation from parents trying to talk their kids into just one thing. Toys R Us wasn't just a store. It was the battleground of birthday dreams and holiday negotiations. And those rainbow wall stripes? They burned themselves into your memory like the start screen of your favorite video game. But while Toys R Us was bright and happy, some stores went bold in a different way, with branding so loud it could practically be seen from space. Zayre didn't whisper for your attention, it shouted. In the 1970s, this department store chain was impossible to miss thanks to its massive neon-colored signage, color block walls, and bold window displays that looked like a disco ball collided with a garage sale. Everything about Zayre was turned up to 11. The font on the sign outside was thick, retro, and unapologetically boxy. Inside, you were greeted by a sea of color: lime green fitting rooms, orange checkout counters, and teal tile floors that probably glowed under black light. Even the product packaging looked like it had been designed during a sugar rush. Zayre had everything from clothing to cosmetics to camping gear, and somehow it all looked like it was marketed directly to people wearing bell-bottoms and tinted sunglasses. You could buy a lava lamp, a beach towel, and a beanbag chair in one trip, and still have change left for lunch. The music overhead was a mix of disco hits and smooth jazz, making your shopping experience feel like a low-budget episode of Soul Train. But while Zayre was about stimulation overload, the next place took a wildly different approach, calm, clinical, and almost robotic in its shopping precision. Service merchandise in the 1970s was a masterclass in retail logistics and an oddly thrilling way to shop. Instead of pushing a cart through cluttered aisles, you browsed sleek glass display cases like you were in a museum of future gadgets. Need a toaster? You'd write down the number, a camera, another number. Each item was labeled like it belonged in a NASA inventory room. Once you had your list, you handed it off at a special counter near the front. And that's when the magic happened. From somewhere deep in the back of the store, a conveyor belt would rumble to life. Like a grocery checkout for gadgets, your chosen items would appear, one by one, sliding down the belt in cardboard boxes like presents delivered by robot elves. It felt efficient, it felt cool, and it gave you time to stare at the person next to you and wonder what they were picking up from aisle B14, row C. Sometimes things came out of the back so fast, you barely had time to blink. Other times you waited like you were hoping your number would be called at a raffle. Still, there was something satisfying about it, a little mechanical magic with a customer service twist. And if all that conveyor belt action made you hungry, well, the next store had your appetite and your shopping cart covered. Woolco was one of the rare places where you could shop for a new toaster, pick up a pair of polyester pants, and then sit down for a full hot meal, all without stepping outside. Nestled in the back of many Woolco stores was the Budget Bistro Cafe, a no-frills eatery that served up burgers, grilled cheese, meatloaf, and enough crinkle-cut fries to feed a small army. You'd grab a tray, slide it down the counter, and watch as someone in a paper hat plopped Salisbury steak onto your plate with all the ceremony of a cafeteria line. But somehow, it felt special. There were Formica tables, vinyl booths, and tiny paper cups of coleslaw that no one really asked for, but always came with the meal. The coffee was endless. The ketchup came in plastic squeeze bottles, and the prices? Gloriously low. Families would spend hours in Woolco, mom shopping, dad checking out power tools, and the kids scarfing down corn dogs before begging for something from the toy section. It was more than convenient. It was community. The clatter of trays and hum of shoppers blended into a soundscape that just felt like a Saturday afternoon. And when you were done with lunch, you'd head back into the store, fueled and focused, ready to pick out greeting cards, gift wrap, or maybe get that roll of film developed, something another chain had turned into its own scented experience. Deckard Drug in the 1970s was part pharmacy, part mini department store, and part time machine. The moment you walked in, the scent hit you. This perfect storm of cold cream, rubber balloon residue, and bubble gum. Up front, there were rows of candy bars and combs, but off to the side? A dedicated greeting card room, that always felt quieter than the rest of the store. Padded carpet, soft lighting, and the gentle rustle of people thumbing through birthday cards for relatives they hadn't called in months. Near the back was the film counter, a tiny plexiglass fortress where your vacation memories went in sealed envelopes and came back a week later in glossy prints, sometimes blurry, sometimes perfect. It was a one-stop shop for shampoo, stamps, and sympathy cards. And the seasonal aisle? A holiday explosion. Plastic Easter baskets in April, dancing Santas by November. It felt cozy and personal, like a store that knew what you needed before you even walked in. Staff wore vests. Prices were printed in bold fonts on yellow signs. And if you hung around long enough, you'd probably find yourself buying something you didn't plan to, like a new pair of sunglasses or a tube of lip balm shaped like a cartoon character. But for a store that made photo pickup oddly magical, another one hit you with nostalgia the second you stepped out of the car, because its smells met you before the doors ever did. Walking into Hill's department store in the 1970s was like being tackled by popcorn and slushies, in the best way. The smell of freshly popped corn hit your nostrils before you even crossed the parking lot. It came from a small food counter just inside the front doors, pumping out buttery, salty goodness with the efficiency of a movie theater on opening night. Kids tugged at their parents' hands, begging for a cup of cherry slush while eyeing the plastic prize rings near the checkout. The shopping came later. First, you had to grab your snack. This wasn't just clever marketing, it was a ritual. That popcorn and sugar combo became part of the Hills' identity. The store itself was sprawling, with wide aisles and floor displays stacked with toys, records, kitchen gadgets, and seasonal knickknacks that changed faster than your report card grades. The toy section was particularly sacred, shelves crammed with action figures, board games, and plastic guns that made way too much noise. The clothing racks were circular playgrounds in disguise, but somehow it always came back to the popcorn. You could be in the middle of shopping for back-to-school clothes, but the crinkle of a popcorn bag would snap your attention back. The scent lingered in your car, on your jacket, maybe even in your hair. And for small-town kids and suburban families alike, Hills was the spot. But if you wanted that same small-town variety with just a touch more chaos and crafting, you probably remember the next store with a lot of love and just a little glitter. TG&Y, short for Toys, Guns, and Yo-Yos, was the ultimate variety store of small-town America. It was the kind of place where you could buy yarn, school supplies, a bag of marbles, and a fishing rod all in one aisle. The floors were usually a bit scuffed, the shelves a bit chaotic, but that was the charm. You never knew exactly what you'd find, just that it would probably cost less than $1. TG&Y was where kids spent their allowance, moms bought fabric for Halloween costumes, and dads picked up duct tape and batteries before a camping trip. There was a toy section with off-brand action figures and bubble-blowing kits. A seasonal aisle that somehow always had leftover tinsel in July. And a small but mighty candy rack that made every checkout line a last-minute negotiation. The place smelled like rubber balloons and cleaning fluid, with a hint of crayon. Employees wore polyester and knew the regulars by name. It wasn't glamorous, but it was reliable. You could run in for school glue and leave with a puzzle, a potholder kit, and a new set of pens. It was a little slice of retail comfort, and it lived in the hearts of anyone who grew up in a town too small for a mall. But even when those errands were done, one more stop was waiting: the quiet, carpeted world of affordable footwear. Payless Shoe Source. In the 1970s was less about flashy deals and more about the quiet satisfaction of walking on carpet while hunting for back-to-school sneakers. Unlike the bright, echoey spaces we're used to now, these stores had low ceilings, dimmer lighting, and full carpeting that muffled your steps and made it feel more like a library of leather and laces. Rows and rows of stacked orange shoeboxes lined the shelves like a fortress of frugality. There were no elaborate displays or wall-length mirrors, just simple benches with a metal bar for your foot and maybe a mom or dad helping you squeeze into your next pair of loafers. Trying shoes on wasn't a rushed affair. You'd take your time, walk a few laps, press your thumb at the toe to check for growing room, and then shove them back in the box if they didn't feel quite right. The stores were quiet, save for the soft squeak of rubber soles on the carpet and the occasional sigh from someone measuring their kid's feet. It was calm, cheap, and oddly cozy. The clerks wore sensible shoes and knew how to tell if a size 7 was really a 7. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable. And for kids getting ready for school or adults on a budget, Payless was a staple. But if you wanted a pharmacy experience that looked more like your uncle's basement den, well, wait until you see what Revco was doing with wood grain. Revco drugstore in the 1970s looked less like a pharmacy and more like someone had converted their wood-paneled basement into a place to pick up aspirin and shampoo. The shelves weren't sterile white. They were rich, fake wood grain with brown and tan decor that made the whole place feel like it was sponsored by a rec room. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but the vibe stayed strangely cozy. You'd walk past end caps full of cough drops and chewing gum, then stumble on aisles with holiday decorations, disposable cameras, and maybe even a lava lamp or two. It was one of the few drugstores where you could accidentally walk in for toothpaste and leave with a new bathroom scale, a Garfield mug, and a tub of cotton balls. Revco had a little bit of everything, organized just loosely enough to encourage aimless wandering. The pharmacy counter was usually tucked away in the back, behind a short maze of greeting cards and shampoo bottles. The checkout clerks knew your parents by name, and the plastic shopping bags crinkled like no other. It smelled like rubbing alcohol and strawberry lip gloss, and the carpet looked like it had been there since the Johnson administration. But it was reliable, familiar, and full of the odd comforts of retail. And if Revco didn't have what you needed, the anchor store down the strip mall probably did, even if it was half lit and mysteriously dusty. Alco discount stores were the forgotten heroes of small-town shopping. These weren't your flashy mall-style department stores. They were squat, square buildings with faded signage and a parking lot that had more oil stains than cars. But inside? Treasure. Rows of everything from flannel shirts to can openers, holiday wreaths to vacuum bags. It had that dim, yellow lighting that made every aisle feel like a back room, and the shelves were always just a little too tall. Kids were constantly getting lost somewhere between automotive supplies and school binders. And yet, if you needed it, Alco probably had it, right next to something you never needed but somehow bought anyway. The store had that dry, cardboard meets popcorn smell that instantly transported you back to Saturday mornings, when errands meant tagging along and maybe walking out with a pack of gum or a toy airplane. Clerks worked the register while chatting with neighbors and knew where everything was, even if the signage didn't. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting. But it was a lifeline for towns without a Walmart yet. And when prices were marked down, they really meant it. You'd dig through clearance bins, flip through racks of marked down pants, and leave feeling like you'd just pulled off the heist of the century. But if Alco had charm in its clutter, the next store had something even more retro. Price stickers applied by hand, one beepless item at a time. Piggly Wiggly in the 1970s was the kind of grocery store where your receipt was handwritten and your patience was tested. There were no barcodes, no scanners, and certainly no self-checkouts. Every item had a sticker, and we mean every single one. Clerks used handheld sticker guns that made a satisfying K-chunk as they priced everything from soup cans to dish soap. You could practically hear the price being applied. And if the sticker fell off or smudged, that was when the cashier would squint, look at you and ask, "Do you remember how much this was?" No one did. Piggly Wiggly's aisles were narrow but packed with staples, and the wooden shelves gave the whole place a rustic, slightly creaky charm. Produce sat in slanted bins under yellowed lights, and the meat counter had that red tile backsplash that made it feel both official and slightly intimidating. You grabbed a cart, passed the S&H green stamp booth, and rolled over those tiled floors that echoed with every wheel squeak. And if you were lucky, a stock boy would hand you a balloon on your way out. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. And it worked. And for anyone who wanted a little more flash with their pharmacy run, the next spot delivered the unexpected thrill of buying a stereo with your sinus spray. Dart Drug in the 1970s was the original multitasker's dream. Need cough syrup, shampoo, a Hallmark card, and a new record player? All under one roof. Dart Drug had a split personality in the best way. Up front, you had your typical pharmacy vibe: cosmetics, toiletries, medicine behind the counter. But venture deeper into the store, and it turned into a mini electronics emporium. Turntables, cassette decks, even televisions lined the shelves like a surprise Radio Shack annex. Kids would press their noses to the glass cases of blinking LED calculators, while their parents argued over which brand of aspirin to buy. It was chaotic, in that comforting 70s way. The lighting was always a little low, the floor a little grimy, and the stereo section always seemed to be playing Fleetwood Mac or Tom Jones. Clerks knew a little about everything but a lot about nothing. You never knew if the tape deck came with speakers or batteries until you opened the box at home. But it didn't matter. Dart Drug made you feel like you could solve your cold, grab a snack, and furnish your entire dorm room in one visit. And if that sensory overload wasn't enough for you, the next store on your list was less about efficiency and more about total bargain bin chaos, on purpose. Pick and Save was retail roulette with a neon sign. You walked in expecting nothing and left with everything you didn't know you needed. Picture a massive warehouse where the organizational strategy was just put it somewhere. Bins, racks, cardboard boxes, all overflowing with socks, screwdrivers, novelty mugs, off-brand shampoo, and leftover Halloween costumes from 3 years ago. It was a sensory overload in the best possible way. The lighting was harsh, the aisles were crooked, the music was a mix of local radio and whatever someone had plugged into the intercom system, but the thrill was real. You could score ceramic figurines for $0.25, 6 packs of neon shoelaces for $1, and enough wrapping paper to last until retirement. Employees barely tried to hide the chaos. That was part of the charm. Shopping there felt like a treasure hunt crossed with a garage sale inside a big box store. And when you found a deal, you clutched it like gold. Families made entire Saturday outings out of a pick and save trip. You'd grab a cart, dig deep into the racks, and come home with a bag full of mysteries and no regrets. The store may be gone now, but its spirit lives on in every clearance aisle that dares to dream. Enter the Sony CV-2000. This was supposed to be the next big leap in home entertainment, a video recorder you could use at home long before VHS was a thing. It sounds amazing, right? Until you realize this beast was massive, heavy, and cost more than most people's cars at the time. We are talking over $1,000 in 1960s money, which is a good chunk of a year's salary for the average person. But price was just one problem. The CV-2000 used reel-to-reel videotape, and even getting it to work with your television set was a gamble. It only recorded in black and white. You had to plug in a separate camera, adjust the knobs just right, and cross your fingers. If anything went wrong, and it often did, you were stuck. Playback was spotty, the tapes jammed constantly, and editing footage? Forget it. For a product meant to bring television magic into your home, it mostly just brought headaches. And despite being the first of its kind, it quietly faded into obscurity, beaten later by cheaper, easier options. But you know what still had people gathering around the television back then? A wild piece of gear that looked like it came straight off a flying saucer. Max Headroom was supposed to be the future, a computer-generated, sarcastic television host who stuttered stylishly and wore sunglasses at night. He was the face of a dystopian digital world, equal parts cyberpunk icon and artificial intelligence with an attitude. Advertisers loved him, especially soda companies, so someone had the bright idea: let us give him a full television series. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. The Max Headroom show was visually interesting but narratively confusing. It tried to blend science fiction with satire, wrapped in glitchy editing and background noise. Most of the time, you were not sure if the show was broken or just being artsy. The plotline featured underground hackers, corrupt corporations, and a bleak media landscape, which ironically kind of predicted the internet. And Max, once a futuristic face of advertising, became more of a trivia answer at bar night. Still, his influence stuck around in weird ways. You can spot traces of max headroom in everything from video game villains to pop music videos. And if you thought that was sensory overload, wait until we talk about the time theaters tried to make movies smell like real life. Back in the 1970s, asbestos was the miracle material nobody questioned. It was fireproof, heatproof, durable, and completely packed into everyday items like ironing board pads. If you were ironing your Sunday best or pressing collars for school, chances are you were standing over a big square of asbestos without even knowing it. The logic back then was that if something could handle heat, it was good. And asbestos? It could handle just about anything, except your lungs. That stuff did not just stay in the pad. It crumbled, it flaked, it floated right up into the air and got breathed in over and over again. Still, no one thought twice. Moms would lean over the ironing board, kids running around, windows shut, and steam rising up like a sauna of danger. It was not until years later that we figured out those innocent little chores came with a free side of cancer risk. And speaking of leaving kids in questionable situations, sometimes they were not in the house at all. Sometimes they were left in the car, alone, with the windows rolled up. The VCR, a marvel that arrived in the 1970s, was akin to a magician in a box, granting us the power to capture time itself. Suddenly, TV schedules no longer dictated our lives. We could record, rewind, and relive our favorite moments at will. The VCR was the herald of home cinema, a concept so revolutionary that even its hefty price tag couldn't dampen its allure. It's a testament to its impact that phrases like "be kind, rewind" are etched in the collective memory of a generation. As DVDs and streaming services emerged, the VCR's star faded, but its legacy of shaping family movie nights and introducing the world to video rentals lives on. Meet the Zeroids. These little battery-powered space robots were the toy store darlings of the late 1960s. They came in shiny chrome colors, had blinking lights, and were advertised as intelligent space companions from another galaxy. Ideal Toy Company pushed them hard, promising a whole line of robot helpers that could perform missions, carry cargo, and respond to their environment. What they actually did was drive in circles, fall over, and occasionally make beeping sounds if you were lucky. Kids thought they were getting the future of artificial intelligence. What they got was a shiny plastic brick with tiny wheels and a bad sense of direction. The battery life was a joke. The gears jammed constantly. And if the carpet was even slightly fluffy, forget it. Your Zeroid was going nowhere. But hey, it looked cool on the shelf. Parents bought them by the dozen for Christmas, but most ended up buried in toy boxes by January. Still, the dream of bringing futuristic tech into everyday life was alive and well. In fact, the very next year, people lined up at the World's Fair to try something even wilder, making a video call face-to-face from a phone booth. Muscle pants for kids, that was the pitch. Somewhere, a grown-up looked at a child and said, "You know what this kid needs? Pants that scream steroid energy." These were Zubaz-style leggings with wild patterns and stretch material designed to mimic the bodybuilding look of adult gym rats. Except they were made for children. The problem was not just the patterns, which, by the way, included everything from neon zebra stripes to camouflage lightning bolts. It was that kids had no idea how to wear them. The pants were often too tight or too loose, and they came with this weird fake athletic vibe that clashed hard with the Sesame Street lunchboxes. These pants were a hard no. Schools started quietly banning them for being distracting, and parents got tired of explaining to teachers that no, their child was not training for a junior weightlifting championship. They were just victims of 1980s fashion. The trend came and went faster than you could say bicep curl. But speaking of trying too hard to look futuristic, let us talk about the time Atari thought your forehead could play video games. Riding in the back of pickup trucks on the highway was just another part of growing up in the 1970s. No seatbelt, no harness, no parental panic attack, just wind in your face and the open road ahead. If you were lucky, you got the wheel well spot so you had something to lean against. If you were really lucky, the driver didn't take sharp turns like they were auditioning for a car chase movie. This wasn't just for country kids either. Suburbs, small towns, even city outskirts. Kids and teens would pile into the back like it was a parade float made of rust and dreams. It sounds completely reckless now because, well, it kind of was. But back then, freedom came first. Safety regulations? A suggestion at best. You needed to haul 6 kids to baseball practice in a truck meant for 3? You made it work. You needed a last-minute ride to the store? Hop in the back. And nobody worried about speed limits or sudden stops. But as safety studies piled up and laws tightened, this practice slowly hit the brakes. Now, in most states, it is straight up illegal. And honestly, it is a miracle more kids did not go flying out onto the freeway. Still, back then, it was a badge of honor. No one was wearing helmets. You just held on to the side and hoped your older cousin didn't start doing donuts. And speaking of things that could land you in the emergency room, let's talk about what toy companies were casually selling to kids like it was no big deal. Long before texting and swiping, there was the thrill of spinning a rotary dial or the sharp click of a push-button phone. Invented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876, the landline phone was the cornerstone of communication. These phones were built like tanks, and hanging up with a slam was its own kind of satisfaction. As cell phones began to dominate in the late 20th century, the once ubiquitous landline started its slow retreat. Yet, in some homes, the landline lives on, a reminder of simpler, more connected times. Remember when phone numbers started with words? Call KL55555, a testament to a time when phone numbers were a jingle, not just a sequence. So let us talk about telex car phones, the early kind. These were supposed to be the peak of convenience, your own private phone line inside your car. Sounds slick, right? Except using one felt like yelling into a toaster that barely heard you. The equipment alone took up half your trunk, with clunky transceivers and roof antennas that made your car look like a spy van. You would pick up the phone, wait for a signal, and then shout into the handset while everyone in traffic stared at you like you were calling from the moon. Reception? Spotty on the best of days. Dropouts were constant, and unless you were in the middle of a major city, the odds of actually getting through were slim to none. Add to that the price tag, which could run higher than the car itself, and it becomes pretty clear why telex car phones never caught on. Not to mention, you had zero privacy. People in the next lane could hear your entire conversation. It was supposed to be the future, but it felt more like a prank. Still, if we are talking about future flops, nothing tops the brief moment in time where Hertz thought regular folks might fly to work. Before the age of sleek athleisure and breathable fabrics, the 1980s gave us Diaglo workout gear. It was made from fluorescent neoprene, yes, that same thick, stretchy material you find in wetsuits, and it covered every inch of your body like your thighs owed someone money. Neon pink, electric green, traffic cone orange, you name it. Someone wore it to aerobics. The idea was to be bold, vibrant, and energetic. The result was usually something closer to a walking safety vest. These outfits were all over workout tapes, with instructors bouncing around in skin-tight ensembles that squeaked when they stretched. It made you sweat like you were jogging inside a microwave. And when you put it on, you looked less like a fitness enthusiast and more like someone who got lost on their way to a roller disco. Yet people bought them in droves, because the commercials promised that if you wore Diaglo, you were serious about your health and your fashion. But let's be real, it was more punishment than performance. Eventually, the trend burned out when everyone realized looking like a glow stick was not worth passing out mid-jumping jack. But if you thought sweating in neon was uncomfortable, just wait until we get into a home appliance that fizzled out almost as fast as it carbonated. Literally. Back before Halloween became a yearly anxiety fest, taking unmarked candy from a neighbor was just how the night worked. You rang a doorbell, yelled, "Trick or treat," and got handed whatever someone had lying around. Loose jelly beans? Great. Homemade fudge and wax paper? Even better. The idea that candy needed to be sealed and tamper-proof had not fully caught on yet. No one was worried about needles or poison. Your biggest fear was getting a box of raisins. Parents did not comb through your haul under a flashlight. They just told you not to eat it all at once. The neighbor handing out popcorn balls or wrapped caramels was not suspicious. They were the cool house. Trust was the currency of the neighborhood, and if someone put effort into a treat, you respected it. Now, we wrap everything in layers of packaging and double-check labels like candy is a security threat. And after all that sugar buzz, you already knew where the real party was, under a disco ball, skates on, and lyrics your parents probably should have listened to more closely. The typewriter, with its rhythmic tap-tap and the ceremonial ding at the end of a line, was the soul of written communication. From Mark Twain to the Beat Poets, it was the instrument of choice for crafting narratives. The introduction of electric models, like the IBM Selectric in the 20th century, was akin to moving from a horse-drawn carriage to a sleek automobile. Yet, the dawn of personal computing in the late 20th century gently ushered this stalwart into the shadows. Still, the typewriter remains a symbol of creativity and nostalgia, cherished by those who yearn for the tangible imprint of ink on paper. Let's not pretend it was ever going to work. The Hertz Rent-A-Car Rocket Belt promo was pure space-age wishful thinking. It was 1966, and Hertz thought, what if the average American didn't just rent a car, but rented a rocket? The pitch was that you could skip traffic and soar through the skies with a rented jetpack. They partnered with Bell Aero Systems, who had a functioning rocket belt prototype used in military demonstrations. On paper, incredible. In practice, a disaster waiting to happen. The belt could only fly for about 20 seconds on a full tank. You would rise up, wobble like a balloon in a windstorm, and slam back down, if you were lucky. It burned through fuel fast, cost tens of thousands of dollars, and had the directional control of a runaway firecracker. Still, the image was unforgettable. A businessman in a suit flying to work over the morning commute. Hertz ran with it for a minute, then quietly dropped it when they realized, the laws of physics still existed. This was less of a transportation idea and more of a comic book scene. And while it disappeared almost instantly, it left behind a legacy of American companies trying way too hard to predict the future. Speaking of which, there's nothing like building a revolutionary new format for home entertainment, only to have it fail not once, but twice. There was a brief, glorious moment in the 1980s when being a math nerd actually made you cool, and that was all thanks to the digital calculator watch. You could do basic math right on your wrist: addition, subtraction, maybe a little division if you were feeling wild. These watches were sleek, futuristic, and they gave kids the illusion of being a young computer genius. But the novelty wore off faster than a sticker on a locker. Teachers banned them from classrooms almost instantly. Kids were using them to cheat on math tests or just to show off during spelling bees. Parents got tired of replacing batteries, and school administrators were not thrilled with little kids clicking away during morning announcements. Plus, if you had even slightly chubby fingers, good luck hitting the right button. It was a gadget that promised convenience, but delivered mostly frustration and a few detention slips. And while that fad disappeared into backpacks and sock drawers, another 1980s product was trying way too hard to sell itself with big names and bigger commercials. But even with a football legend at the front, it still missed the catch. If you were a kid in the 1970s, chugging water straight from the garden hose was basically a rite of passage. You would be out playing tag, riding bikes, or building questionable tree forts and suddenly realize you were dying of thirst. No one ran inside for a water bottle. You went for the hose. You cranked the knob, let the sun-heated water blast out for a few seconds, and then put your mouth right on the nozzle. No one asked where the hose had been or what might be growing inside it. Rubbery taste? Totally normal. Mystery specks? Built character. Parents barely noticed unless you soaked your shirt. Nobody thought twice about what kinds of chemicals were leaching from the plastic or whether small bugs had made it their home. We just drank and kept running. But when it came to food, there were rules. Except during Halloween, when those rules took a break and you took candy from strangers with zero hesitation. The floppy disk, a cornerstone of early personal computing, emerged in the late 1960s, symbolizing the first foray into portable digital storage. When the 3.5-inch floppy was introduced, many pondered, who would ever need that much storage? A notion that now elicits a chuckle in our gigabyte-saturated age. The act of inserting a floppy disk, accompanied by its characteristic click, defined an era of computing in the 80s and 90s. Despite its obsolescence due to advancing storage technologies, the floppy disk endures in the digital lexicon, immortalized as the universal save file icon. This subtle homage serves as a nostalgic reminder of the disk's pivotal role in the evolution of data storage and management. Now, Polaroid's 360 land camera should have been a hit. Polaroid was already flying high in the 1960s. Everyone loved the idea of snapping a photo and watching it develop in real time. The 360 model took things up a notch. It had electronic flash support, a fancy focusing system, and loads of bells and whistles. It was supposed to be the professional-grade Polaroid, perfect for serious photographers and advanced hobbyists. Problem was, nobody asked for that. The 360 was bulky, expensive, and relied on complicated battery packs that drained faster than the flash could charge. Half the time, the film jammed. The focusing system required a steady hand and an engineer's patience. And even if you got everything to work, the pictures were not that much better than the simpler models. Most families just wanted something quick and easy for birthdays and vacations, not a camera that made you feel like you were defusing a bomb. Eventually, Polaroid wised up and leaned back into simplicity. The 360? It got shelved. But hey, if complicated tech was the name of the game, nobody played it harder than the company that tried to sell smart robots to kids. Robots that mostly just spun in place. The Atari MindLink sounds like something a supervillain would use to take over the world, but in reality, it was a headband, a plastic one, that claimed to read your thoughts and turn them into in-game controls. The promise was simple: no hands, no controllers, just your mind. And that promise immediately hit a brick wall called 1980s science. The MindLink was supposed to pick up electrical signals from your forehead muscles and translate them into commands. In practice, that meant you had to clench and twitch your brow in weird ways to move a pixel around the screen. The truth was that the MindLink was way ahead of its time, and not in a good way. It launched into testing and was quickly shelved when even Atari realized nobody wanted to win Space Invaders with their eyebrows. Maybe it would have worked better as a meditation trainer or a fancy headache inducer. Either way, the MindLink was canceled before it ever hit store shelves, and thank goodness, because if it had gone mainstream, we might all be sitting in silence, furrowing our brows to check email. Now let us move from mind control to media meltdown with a television icon who could not quite make the jump from cool to coherent. Leaving kids in the car while you shopped was not only common, it was considered efficient parenting. You would crack the window a little, toss a snack in the back seat, and tell them not to touch the gear shift. That was it. No seat warmers, no climate control, just the burning hot vinyl seats and a juice box to keep them busy. You would run into the grocery store, the post office, maybe even the mall, and come back 20 minutes later like it was nothing. Sometimes the kid was asleep, sometimes reading, sometimes playing with the door locks like it was a game. There were no viral videos or angry phone calls to the authorities. People assumed kids were tougher back then, or maybe they just really trusted that nothing would go wrong. Sure, you would get the occasional warning to not talk to strangers through the car window, but that was the extent of it. It was all part of the era's free-range approach to parenting. And while the kids were stuck in the car, the adults, they were likely sneaking a break of their own, somewhere smoky and very much on school property. Imagine a time when the centerpiece of every living room was a bulky, boxy behemoth, the CRT TV. Coming into prominence in the 1950s, this technological marvel turned the humble living room into a bustling family theater. Picture the excitement as families gathered around to watch the moon landing or the latest episode of I Love Lucy. Despite its hefty frame, the CRT TV was the window to the world, until the sleek and slender flat screens of the early 2000s gently nudged it into the annals of history. Yet, ask any vintage video game enthusiast, and they'll wax poetic about the unmatched charm of playing on a CRT. Before streaming in HD, the CRT TV was the family's bond, the newsbringer, and the entertainer, all rolled into one. So imagine this. It is 1961, and you are cruising down the road in what looks like a spaceship on two wheels. That was the dream Ford tried to sell with the Gyron. It was a futuristic concept car that did away with four wheels entirely. Instead, it balanced on just two, using a gyroscope. Yes, like the kind in science fiction movies. There were no pedals, no steering wheel, and barely any chance you would be able to drive it. But man, did it look cool. The body was sleek, all sharp angles and bubble domes, and it screamed speed even though it never actually hit the highway. Ford hyped it up big at car shows, but behind the curtains everyone knew it was all show and no go. The technology just was not there. The gyroscope was hard to manage, and the car itself was so unstable it needed little kickstands when parked. It never made it past the showroom floor. The original prototype? Destroyed in a fire. The Gyron did not just fail, it vanished. But that did not stop companies from continuing their obsession with the future. In fact, the very next year, one of them tried to bring the future into your living room. You just needed an extra $1,000 and a lot of patience. It looked like something straight out of a haunted dollhouse and somehow got greenlit as a beauty product. The Rejuvenique face mask promised younger, firmer skin through electrical muscle stimulation, which is a fancy way of saying it zapped your face with little shocks. Advertised by a former soap opera star, the mask wrapped around your head like a plastic exoskeleton and turned your facial routine into something that felt like a scene from a horror film. The idea was that the stimulation would tone your face like a gym tones your body, but customers mostly reported mild burns, numbness, and the distinct feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. Despite airing on television with the enthusiasm of a late-night miracle cure, it flopped hard. It was the kind of product that felt less like a beauty tool and more like a sci-fi movie prop that somehow escaped the set. Still, you had to admire the ambition. If you could survive the Rejuvenique, surely you could survive anything the 1980s had to throw at you. And as it turns out, that next throw was straight at the kids, because someone thought gym fashion should start in elementary school. Saturday morning cartoons were a sacred ritual. You poured yourself a bowl of cereal, plopped down in front of the television, and prepared to spend the next few hours in a sugar-fueled animation binge. But sprinkled between all those talking animals and laser-blasting space battles? Beer ads? That's right. Alcohol companies had no problem promoting their newest brew to an audience still wearing footy pajamas. You could go from He-Man saving the universe to a slow-motion pour of foamy beer into a frosted mug, all in the same commercial break. And these were not vague nods to adult life. We are talking full-on beer jingles with catchy tunes and smiling actors, clinking glasses in backyard barbecues. Kids grew up humming these tunes without even knowing what they were singing about. To the networks, airtime was airtime. If it sold, it played. No one raised a red flag. Parents were more worried about how many Pop-Tarts you ate than whether your favorite cartoon was brought to you by a six-pack of light beer. And when the commercials ended, you ran outside with your friends. No shoes, no helmets, just two wheels and a scraped knee waiting to happen. Once a beacon of connectivity, the payphone stood as a testament to public communication. Scattered across urban and rural landscapes, they offered a lifeline, a portal to distant voices. Indeed, finding a forgotten quarter in the coin return slot felt akin to winning the lottery, a small urban treasure hunt that could brighten any day. As cell phones became our constant companions, the need for these metal guardians waned, and they vanished from our streets. Yet, their iconic image lives on in movies and memories, a relic of a time when staying in touch meant a pocket full of coins and a booth around the corner. And no, that is not a metaphor. Hertz actually promoted a real jetpack. The rent-a-car rocket belt was a short-lived idea cooked up in the 1960s when the space craze had everyone thinking the future meant flying through the sky instead of driving on boring roads. Hertz partnered with Bell Aerosystems, who had built a functioning rocket belt for the military. The campaign imagined businessmen renting jetpacks to bypass traffic. The belt could fly for 20 seconds. That was it. And it guzzled hydrogen peroxide like it was soda. The cost was ridiculous, and let us not even talk about safety. There was no steering. You just blasted up, prayed for balance, and hoped you landed somewhere near your destination. As a promo stunt, it was electric. Everyone wanted to try it. But in the real world, it was a lawsuit waiting to happen. It never left the testing phase, and Hertz quickly backed off before someone got launched into a telephone pole. But hey, it was not the only time the 1960s gave kids access to something wildly unsafe, because our next entry is a toy that somehow got approved for the shelves, even though it came with a built-in heating plate. Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future. Even the title sounds like it is trying a little too hard. This was not just a show, it was an experience. It blended live-action television with interactive toys that could shoot and receive fire using light signals. The toys would respond to what was happening on screen. Miss a blast, lose points, hit a target, score. It was the 1980s equivalent of augmented reality. And for about 5 minutes, it felt revolutionary. But there was one small issue. It was unbelievably complicated. You needed the toys. You needed the right episodes. You needed everything lined up perfectly, or the experience just fell apart. Parents were not thrilled with having to buy an entire shelf of gear just to make the show playable. Kids got frustrated when their PowerJet XT7 refused to register a hit or randomly shut off mid-battle. The show itself was dark, overly serious, and way too intense for its age group. It felt like a war documentary with lasers. The toy-to-show synergy was ahead of its time, but far too messy to last. The dream of fusing television and toys never quite stuck the landing. But if you thought that was an ambitious media crossover, just wait until you hear about the time our favorite sarcastic alien tried to host his own late-night talk show. Saturday morning cartoons were a sacred ritual. You poured yourself a bowl of cereal, plopped down in front of the television, and prepared to spend the next few hours in a sugar-fueled animation binge. But sprinkled between all those talking animals and laser-blasting space battles? Beer ads? That's right. Alcohol companies had no problem promoting their newest brew to an audience still wearing footy pajamas. You could go from He-Man saving the universe to a slow-motion pour of foamy beer into a frosted mug, all in the same commercial break. And these were not vague nods to adult life. We are talking full-on beer jingles with catchy tunes and smiling actors, clinking glasses in backyard barbecues. Kids grew up humming these tunes without even knowing what they were singing about. To the networks, airtime was airtime. If it sold, it played. No one raised a red flag. Parents were more worried about how many Pop-Tarts you ate than whether your favorite cartoon was brought to you by a six-pack of light beer. And when the commercials ended, you ran outside with your friends. No shoes, no helmets, just two wheels and a scraped knee waiting to happen. If this walk down the aisles of memory gave you flashbacks and a smile, tell us which store you missed the most. Hit like, tap subscribe, and drop a comment before these memories check out again.